Hi friends. Today we're gonna talk about a little bit of the leadership skills that don't often get a lot of attention. And if you've been a listener for any amount of time so far, you know that we talk a lot about systems. But there's some things that just can't really be systemized, or they can't be systemized in the traditional sense of here's the SOP, here's the checklist, here's the poster on the wall of how it's done. Um, and it comes with that journey from coming from a trainer to a business owner. And in the same sense, you can't really systemize like, how do I really get a pulse check on clients? And how do I know when they're having a bad day? It's a skill that you develop with experience. What we're going to talk about today is how to deal with some like team member or potentially even client conflict. So, Pete, I know I've got a couple stories about actually recent stories that I really leaned into this and everything worked out great. And I imagine you've probably got lots of stories like this as well because you've been in business for longer than I have.
Yeah, and I think I've dealt with it well at times and poorly at others. And I have some fresh experiences just because of the challenges associated with relocating a business in the last couple of weeks. We've been operating at a place where we are feeling on edge for sure. And the team is kind of reflecting that in their behavior. And I'm sure I am as well. And it comes home with me too, you know. I'm sure you know when you get home and your wife calls you out and she's like, "What's the deal?" And you haven't even said anything yet. that's kind of, that's kind of where my house is at these days, and it's because conflict comes up when we're all stressed, and I've got long story short, I got a lot of experiences in this recently, Ben. I don't know that I've done a phenomenal job with it every time, but I've learned every time.
Yeah. Well, and that's part of the magic here is, as Michael said to me years ago, but it stuck with me. Hard conversations don't get easier. You just get better at having them. So I
Oh,
think that actually kind of ties into the core message here. We'd like to give you some skills, and I've got some steps for you listeners to help you kind of deal with these things. But Pete's point's well taken that you're not going to knock it out of the park every time, but you're never going to knock it out of the park if you don't swing. Baseball.
perfect. Two good quotes there. I like the Michael one. I'm
Uh,
going to put that on my wall, on my kid's wall.
um, well, do you want me to start with one of my recent stories?
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay, so um, I've been looking to have someone sit in kind of the head coach role at my gym, lead coach, call it whatever you want, but they're in charge of quality control, making sure that sessions are being done properly with session audits, making sure that our programming standards are being met, and running continuing education for the team. It's not a huge role. I broke it down to probably an average of 3 to 4 hours a week based on the systems we have. And we've got this wonderful coach who's been with us for about a year, who's a retired teacher. His communication skills are great. His technical expertise are great. He's been doing this for 15 years. We went through the formal interview process. We weren't just like, yo, you want this job? And we presented to the team, and he applied, and he ended up getting the role. Fast forward to maybe a month in, nothing was being done. This role does have a lot of independence, and I inspected what I expected, and I noticed that like shit just like straight up wasn't happening, or it wasn't happening to the degree we had discussed or the timeline we had agreed to. And I had, like you, I come home and I'm like, my wife is like, "What's on your mind?" I can tell something's up, and I'm like, there's the frustration that this is a new role, and it's like, come on, we're still in the honeymoon phase, and shit's not happening. Like this is a really bad sign. And there's also the frustration of the like monkeys in my head of you to myself. It's like I'm always going to have to do this. I'm always going to be in this role. It doesn't light me up. It's always going to be the same. I'm never going to reach that horizon. If you've ever had that feeling before, just a feeling of defeatedness. So I talked to my GM about it, and we went back and forth. And surprise, surprise, the answer was have the hard conversation, and my job was to lean in. So I set a meeting with this coach and started from the place because the problem was one, the things weren't happening, but two, I had a story about what was going on, and as with all stories, they're usually fiction. So I started with like what's going on with him personally, and that some expectations haven't been met, but like hey man, like I wanted to start, like this is really unlike you. You've been really on the ball since you started here. Like, what's up? Are you okay? Well, I'll spare you all the details of the conversation because it was a little bit windy and twisty, but turns out he's got a ton of family stuff going on. He's got three, I don't want to share details because it's his thing, but he's got three independent family things, and any one of them alone would rock me. The fact that he's dealing with this was like, holy shit, you've got that going on. And like, all right. And what I didn't want to do was, well, the asshole part of me wanted to come down on him and be like, what the fuck? This isn't working. I don't trust you, etc. I knew that wouldn't serve the business. I wasn't trying to push him out because he's a tremendous coach, really, really good. But I wanted to make sure that we weren't going to throw the baby out with the bathwater. And through having this hard conversation, we were able to actually like really adjust this role, right size it for him, where he's still going to help with some of it. But it kind of lit a bit of a fire in me to help fill some of the gaps that led to those things being missed in the first place. And now we're probably a month removed from this. And now we're at a place where he's contributing, he's hitting his stuff. I don't have any of those stories running me. So I feel like newly inspired about my business and what's possible. And I'm actually running the continuing education for the team. So there's so many times I share this because there's so many times I've talked to a BFU member who's like, oh, my trainer missed a couple of expectations. Like, when should I fire them? And one of my first questions is like, have you talked to them about this already? Like, I need a little bit more context for like, when do I fire this person? And sometimes there is a time and a place to just let somebody go. Not everybody's a good fit. And more often than not, when you have somebody's a good, it seems like a good fit and the right person in the right seat, but things aren't being done. There's usually some either misalignment of expectations, which I believe is on you as the leader, more often than not, or there's something else going on. It's very rare that you've got a team member who's missing expectations because they're trying to fucking torpedo your business. I just don't see that happening almost ever. But that's sometimes a story that we tell ourselves and we get emotionally worked up and we can't sleep at night and all those things. And like, it's just not true. And once you start having that conversation, you realize like what's actually going on and you're able to come to a solution when you have all the information.
Well, it's a great story and it's an example of the same issue I've found myself in again and again. I make this mistake at work. I make this mistake in my personal life. And it's just failing to understand the fact that everybody has shit going on, not just us. We're so egocentric that we think, I've got problems. No one else has problems. That person's being an asshole because they're an asshole. And I constantly find myself on these podcast conversations coming back to the fact that what we do as bosses and leaders is just such a wonderful extension of all the conversations we have as parents of young kids. And I find myself having to have this discussion with my boys constantly. That person, like, he's got one of my kids has a friend whose parents are going through major turmoil in their marriage, like not getting along, and it's in his house. And that kid's not the best kid when he is out and about these days. And I can't tell my kid that. I can't say, well, this is because so-and-so did this and so-and-so disagreed with that decision. No, I have to say, he might have a lot going on that you don't know about, and it's impacting the way he behaves. That's no different from what happened with you. It's no different from the fact that I probably was less enjoyable to work for during the calendar year of 2025 than I was in 2024 because we were at the end of the road with a terminally ill mother-in-law, and every bit of it impacted how I showed up for everything. And I didn't realize it until after the fact. But the point is, we're all kind of fighting a battle, and our bad behavior, to your point, is very rarely about bad intent. It's really just a function of an extension of where we're at outside of here or what's going on in our head. And I want to build off of your point, if you don't mind. I had a conversation of this nature recently with someone who was having a hard time with a direct report who just wasn't getting stuff done. Like you said, this is a member Unicorn Society. And this business owner said, we're on this roller coaster, this yo-yo of good performance, they fall off. I remind them, they fall off. And we do this. This is the story of social media at my gym. It is, hey guys, we got to do a better job getting content out. It's time. We have one great week. I convinced myself we've fixed it. We have 2 bad weeks. We have another come to Jesus talk in the next staff meeting. Maybe we get 2 good weeks this time. And I need to do a better job of practicing what I preach here. But the feedback that I gave him was, we need to stop thinking we've fixed it because we had 1 good week. And we need to start positively reinforcing the successes in the moment. And instead of saying, all right, that's good, let's move to the next task needs to wait, because what we need to do the next day is come back and say, hey, you crushed it yesterday. How are we going to do this again today? And then it's, hey, you've been on fire this week. I think we've got some really good momentum with this social media content. Is there any way I can be a resource to make sure we finish the week strong? Because I'd love to be in the same place a week from today. And instead of putting a Band-Aid on something, walking away and coming back and having to patch that wound again later, I'm just stepping on the gas. I'm pouring fuel on the fire. You're doing a good job. This continues to be important to me. Please let me know how I can help you out. And so we just, it's kind of that rule. You say something once, okay. You say something 3 or 4 times, you feel like you've said too much. You kind of almost haven't even scratched the surface. I heard Hormozy say this a year or 2 back as it relates to our marketing. He's like, you probably need to say it 100 times more than you're currently saying it. And the same thing goes here. This isn't just, what gets measured gets managed, this is more than that. This is like our own kind of personal ethos. It's important to me, so I'm going to tell you every day. I apologize if that's redundant, but I'm going to keep telling you because it matters that much to me. And I think that's the solve that has helped me the most in the last year or so as a leader.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Because I see with Gym Owners and Unicorn Society 2 things. One is they've said it once, and often they, if they're not, bless their hearts, don't have much skill with hard conversations. They're like, hey, I noticed this thing. Can you okay, thanks. And it's like those expectations weren't even remotely clear. Or the thing I see is that they really hit the accelerator for a few days, maybe even a few weeks. But when they let their foot off the gas, they let it completely off the gas. And in the following few days, it comes completely to a rest. And then they end up having 50 priorities to manage at any one time, rather than actually putting a system and expectations in place where they can hit the accelerator to get it up to speed and then keep it going at cruise control. And it comes from those 2 things. One is leaning into that hard conversation, even if it feels like the millionth time that social media has to come up again. Or 2, just not shying away from the hard conversation and jumping to a conclusion based on the story that they've been mulling over in their head for 2 weeks without addressing the actual core issue or figuring out the impact or the intent of the person that the thing happened with.
So can I give an example that differs from this, in that kind of the soft, and I guess I'll say, I had a run-in with our new neighbor in the last 48 hours. And it wasn't really the business owner. It was the property manager of our next door neighbor. And we are one of 2 tenants in this building. So it's important that we know how to cohesively function. And this guy came in hot at the end of a weekday. And he came in the office, and I happened to be standing there at the front desk in a full office. My son was there. My office manager was there. There might have been a parent on the couch. And he didn't like the way the parking lot was being used. He took issue with some of our clients parking on his side of the building. Whether that is acceptable or not is neither here nor there in this case, because what I want to talk about is approach. He came in really negative. I mean, kind of patronizing, condescending tone, aggressive with me. And at first, I tried to check all the boxes in my BFU, difficult conversations playbook in my head. That's okay. We're going to calm this down. I'm going to be kind of the more logical, sane person in this. And it wasn't working. And I very quickly realized I need a pivot to kind of mirroring his energy. And so I basically said to him, listen, I'm going to give you a do-over. If you want to start this conversation again, one where your tone isn't so condescending and you aren't so aggressive with me, I think we can resolve this pretty quickly. But I'm going to return the energy that you bring to me in every conversation you and I have from this point forward. Would you like to restart? And he was clearly thrown by that initially, but it stopped all of the problems. I mirrored him for 10 seconds. He realized what was happening. And he said, okay, fine. Here's what's driving me nuts. And he didn't even come in to talk to me. He didn't open with what was driving him nuts. He came in with some other nonsense that didn't even make sense. He was just so heated when he came through the door. He didn't have an opportunity to take a deep breath and step in and be like, let's have an adult conversation. But a little bit of mirroring got us there. And we ended with the BFU playbook stuff. But the point is, if there's a massive disconnect between how you approach the conversation and the other person does, like one person's super high, the other one's low, one person's super low key, the other one's really wound up and agitated, you're going to inevitably run into a disconnect, this chasm that's really hard to get over. So I needed to use instincts, just like you're talking about, and mirror a little bit. And we got to a place that could work. And for the record, we exchanged cell phone numbers, and I said, hey, anytime you run into this issue, I'm excited to solve this, whether I'm here or not. I have resources here, but we just have to have a slightly modified approach to how we do this. And I'll tell you what, Ben, we got in the car to drive home, my son Colin and I, because he was at the gym training, and he came in and he saw that, and I could see on his face he was panicked because I was elevating my voice at another adult. We got in the car, and he asked me kind of what he did and what happened. But he told me he was so proud of me when he watched the rest of the conversation. And it was the best. It was absolutely the best. Like any of my employees could have been like, you handled that well. And I'd be like, whatever, that guy's an asshole. But instead, my son, my 11-year-old, said I was really proud of how you handled that. And it made my whole entire week. So difficult conversations can be good.
Well, I mean, if your 11-year-old son is recognizing how you showed up, that's probably the best testament I could think of to the demonstration of leadership skills in action.
So how do you want to round this out with good takeaways, meaningful action items?
Yeah, well, your story is a really powerful example of where, like, there's no playbook for how to deal with an agitated, heated neighbor who comes in. Like, what a beautiful curveball you threw, but that came from skill. And I think I'd argue, and you'd probably agree, that that just comes from years of practice, and that practice has to start somewhere. So to make this actionable, I think I've got two things for people. First, if you're dealing with any interpersonal challenges, whether it's stories you've fabricated in your head, whether you're recognizing the fiction or not, or just like, shit, how do I deal with this? The first step and principle is to really be willing to lean in. And by lean in, it's not just talk to the person, it's get curious with the person. Whether it's a clever curveball like you threw to mirror somebody else's energy, or just see what's up with somebody like I did with that coach, you've got to get curious, and you've got to set some time aside to do that and be in a good headspace. And then the second takeaway is to give you a little bit of a framework for this, because even though it can't really be truly systemized, there are best practices. I want to go over our 5 steps of giving feedback. Feedback isn't always the move. Again, if your neighbor's yelling at you, you're kind of like, can I give you some feedback about your attitude? That's probably not going to go over well. But more often than not, you can open the conversation with like, hey, can I give you some feedback? Here's what I've been noticing. And then it actually leads into like what's really going on. So the 5 steps are: first, get consent. And that looks like, hey, Pete, I've got some feedback for you. Is now a good time? And they're allowed to say no. If they're having a terrible day and they're like, now's really got a good time, you can be like, great. It's important to me that we talk in the next 24 hours. When's a good time for you? But don't force feedback on someone if they don't actually want it. Second is just to share the facts and feelings. So that looks like, hey, Pete, what I've seen and heard is blah, blah, blah. And that really made me feel this way. It's not just you were late. It's you were late and what's the impact of that, the thing that's going through your head that's keeping you up at night. The third step is you need to acknowledge their perspective. And that looks like, what has your experience been? And let them talk. Ask probing questions throughout. Try to hold up a mirror to reflect back what they're saying, so it helps them get even clearer on what they're experiencing. Because it might be, someone comes in heated. It might also be a coach who's like, yeah, I've actually been meaning to tell you, I've got these crazy things going on, and like I'm feeling lost. I don't know where to go from here. Like, that completely changed the tone of the conversation for me. It went from you're in trouble to how can I support you and get a mutually important job done. Step 4 is like, you're still their boss, so share some wants. And that looks like, what I'd like to have happen next is X. What do you think should happen next? Make it a collaboration. Sometimes that's going to be exchanging cell phone numbers so you can not have an argument in front of your customers. And And sometimes that actually is making some changes to a role or responsibilities or shifts or who knows what, whether it's a temporary or permanent basis. And the last step, and probably the most important step, is you need to agree to action. And that you're not always going to have a solve for this. Sometimes the accountability, let's say a coach was late, you're not going to be like, all right, moving forward, I'm going to text you 2 hours before to make sure you're awake. Like, it doesn't have to be that, but it's collaborating on like, how do I hold you accountable to this? Or how do we work together to make sure that this doesn't become a pattern of behavior and we're having this conversation, but at another level the following week? So again, get consent, share facts and feelings, acknowledge their perspective, share your wants, and agree to action. Now, I will say this isn't the perfect formula that is guaranteed to knock it out of the park every time, but I'd say like 90 to 95% of the time, this structure works, but it only works through getting better. Like, hard conversations don't get easier, you just get better at having them.
Yep. And for me, the takeaway is plans never work, but planning always does. I'd suggest if you're in a leadership position and you find yourself consistently having conversations of this nature, I'd have those 5 steps written down, even worst case scenario on a post it note on my computer monitor. And I'd read it for 20 seconds before opening the door to start that conversation. And the only other piece of advice I'll give in closing to build off of this would be if you're somebody who is on the receiving end of a difficult conversation that you didn't see coming, it can make you feel blindsided. And one of the takeaways I had from my difficult conversation the other night was whenever I have these, I realize that my heart rate's a little elevated, my like kind of sweating, and I'm like, oh, I'm so wound up tight at the conclusion of it. And I didn't realize it was happening. And I was telling my landlord that this conversation went down because he's kind of responsible. He's going to be the one who's going to hear from both parties if something goes really sideways. And I said, hey, this went down. I think we're good, but I want you to know in case you get any complaints. But I think we're good. And he said, whenever I have somebody come at me with a conversation like that, I request a change of venue. And I was like, what do you mean? And he goes, if someone came at me in your office and I wasn't expecting that, I'd ask if we could step out front to have the conversation because it felt like I got a little bit of control back. And at the very least, I wasn't completely the victim in this, like, what feels like an attack. And it felt so brilliant to me because I could have and should have said to him, hey, let's just step right out front. The door's right there. We don't need to have this conversation in front of my son and my office manager, Kristen, and all these people. And it might have changed the power dynamic mentally a little bit. And it's not an insulting question. Cool, let's have that conversation. Can we go 20 feet over there? And I think it might have changed the game, and I would have been a little less aggressive in my response, even though it worked.
Yeah, that's a good point. Sometimes I've had some, if it's like step into my office, Pete, I've got some feedback for you. Even if the feedback is about how good you're doing, I bet that's going to spike your heart rate a little bit and be like, oh shit, going into the principal's office, am I going to get in trouble? So there could be something to be said for like, I've got some feedback for you. Could we go for a quick walk around the block or to the park or the coffee shop or, whatever? It buys you a little bit of time. And changing the kind of structural environment means it's like it throws out the routine a little bit, to your point, which is useful.
Yeah, a mutually agreeable space. Everybody's in control.
Yeah, let's leave it there. So if you're having any interpersonal anything, 1, lean in. 2, use those 5 steps for feedback to give yourself a chance at getting it right, a very likely chance to get it right. And 3, if needed, find a mutually agreeable environment so that both people kind of can relax a little bit and feel that sense of control. Thanks for your time, Pete.
Good chatting. We'll talk soon.
Talk soon.